Now, we're happy that the Minister of Finance, as we need more money as we go to some just transition, and I think it would be nice to hear how he's going to mobilize the world and the global fund to be able to assist everyone to the transition. The invitation to this meeting by Comrade Vali Musa was on the understanding that he just invite one of his old comrades to share the journey we've traveled along, together from the climate change and the global warming. So, and he emphasized to me, I must say, and I'm not sure whether I'm divulging our secret, that I was at liberty to say anything about that journey and and that I will not be called to account. So when you put me in the agenda as a general secretary of the federation, I thought, no, you are setting me up because I wanted to speak as freely as possible on this issue as you've invited me to do. Let me just say that my involvement in the climate discussions go back as early as 2001, when the United Nations, under the leadership of the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, decided that the Rio Plus 10 conference, which is now popularly known as the World Summit on Sustainable Development, will be held in South Africa. I think our government and others behind the scenes know why they chose South Africa at that time. Critical to that decision was that the voice of the civil society needed to be heard. Because as we all know that the UN forums, as the COP, the Conference of Party, are government platform. And the question at that time was how then will the voice of the civil society be integrated in looking to the solution for the future on this summit. So a decision then was taken that a parallel civil society summit has to be organized under the auspices of the UN. And that for South Africa, with its good credential on social dialogue, will serve that purpose. And the main civil society prominent at that time was COSATU and the South African Council of Churches. I'm not saying any others were not important, but they were known to be the voices and critical voices that needed to be considered. And in that context, we were then approached to lead and convene that civil society parallel to that one of the UN. And with the help of the minister, I think at that time, Minister was Minister Kortbrook, if I'm not mistaken. Comrade Valley, you may remind me, I think either you were before him or you follow him, I can't remember when. When COSATU was then approached, Comrade Mandashe and Comrade EP, who were then serving on the Central Committee of COSATU, tasked me to lead this discussion. This was a new journey for us at all to be involved in the climate change or environmental discussions. What was important then, which I will talk to it later, was that Thabo Mbeki, the president of the country at that time, who was going to be the chairperson of the summit, felt very strongly that the civil society, even if they were not going to be part of the official delegates in Sandton as the summit was going to be held there, he convened a meeting of the civil society and he said it's important for him to know the voices of the civil society, because if you have to deal with climate change or the environment challenges, you need to hear the civil society. And indeed, he convened us He gave us an ear. We raised our issues at that time. And since then, the participation of COSATU in the UN Commission on Sustainable Development and various COP meetings where we engage with Minister of that time, Vali Musa and Kripswi, and the subsequent ministers of environment make a big impact, particularly for South Africa, because it says whenever our minister or our government table a position at the global level, it has to incorporate the views of all, including the civil society, business, and all the meetings of the COPs. The Minister of Environment will convene this meeting, take our views alongside the position of South Africa. The WSSD, I must say, resolved a number of issues. It resolved the debate as whether there was something called climate change, because there was a denialist at that time, and it settled also the causes, who are the causes of this climate change and global warming. It also resolved the issues about the emitter to pay, the politics between the North and the South, between the developed and the developing countries, the differentiated responsibility, the financing of the climate change. But it also resolved and balanced the issues between the planet, those green environmentalists, the people, and prosperity. So coming from that Johannesburg summit, a number of issues were resolved, and the global community resolved that we needed to discuss how we needed to move forward. This is where then the trade union came in very strongly. And COSATU with the global trade unions, acknowledging that the issues of the environment and the climate change is a workers' issue, but also is a class issue, because the poorest of the world are the likely to be mostly affected and suffer the climate change. And therefore, taking a stance or neutral stance was not going to be helpful for the trade. It is then that the trade unions then develop this concept of a just transition. And transition in its complete meaning, the question that we'll need a new technology, we'll need scaling, we'll need the mitigating and adaptation, and that the changes are coming. And the question is, how do we position ourselves to those changes? It also acknowledged that the status quo will not work, and that a plan without securing of jobs will not work. The polarization of the debate will not work either. And so the debate and the discussion that coal will sometimes have to remain underground and we will not be using them, we needed to shut down the industry immediately, was not going to work either. So the trade unions, the global trade union in particular, entered this phrase. And I think we negotiated for this global just transition for almost 10 years, just coming and demonstrating where the events were held and talking to the drafters. And I think South Africa and other progressive government were giving ear to this, that we must accept that as we transit, some jobs will be lost, but there are big opportunities, but we need to manage it quite carefully, the question of just transition. So in 2009, in our congresses and etc., we then adopt this approach of just transition, that we don't want to be spectators, we want to be involved. We must say now that while this has been accepted, but the progress, particularly for our own country, is lagging behind. I think we are lagging behind many countries. And I think we need to find how do we move with speed in addressing these particular issues. The just transition to low carbon economy cannot occur without workers and the people at the center of transition, as they stand a chance that they will be most affected. And the current experience of multiple impacts for climate change and the response to it is what I think this commission need to be addressing. So we appreciated that in the composition of the commission, there will be voices that represent the constituencies we're coming from and the civil society in a broad way. It's not a government alone, it's not a business issue alone, but is an all-inclusive commission. Let me come to the input that has been made today, which is encouraging. Though it says less, I must say, because I think this is an open discussions, that from businesses, we hear the new technologies. What has not been emphasized is the question of the new jobs and how are we going to be transforming or transition from the old jobs to the new jobs, particularly to those young people that got a future in these issues. So we must, as South Africa, in my view, comprehend that we're lagging behind, that any delay will make the world not to be sympathetic to us. Therefore, the question of coordination, the question of time and the cooperation within government departments should be carefully managed, because as we know that ministers are heading competing portfolios. There are those who want to ensure that energy from Eskom, for an example, is generated to the maximum. There are those that in their portfolio, their responsibility is that we can't allow the status quo to continue in that way. It needs to be managed, in our view, to the best of our ability. But also want to say that the auspices the commission under the auspices of the president is critical, particularly for those completing and competing interests that they need to be managed. But we must not be shy away to say that as we move from the status quo to the new areas, as Minister Mantashe was saying, we are going to be in a learning curve, and there will be disruptive elements as we move on. And I think also the CEO of Eskom and Exaro have indicated that the communities that where they are operating will be affected, and they need to be taken on board in dealing with those issues. But there has to be a better understanding that the question of climate change and the environmental change is broader than the question of energy. Of course, we are correct to focus on the energy because they might be the bigger emitter in these particular issues. But there are other sectors that need to be considered seriously. The production of the plastic, and we know here that we have tried in the past to do away with plastic bags. We have tried to put money, and there are other retailers who have just come out quite clear and says we're not going to be using plastic in our retailers. The question of rubber, when I heard that the Minister of Transport was here, was mentioned to be here, the rubber, the banning on the rubber on the roads. So the question of transport, the paper industries and the trees, the local government were happy to hear that Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is here. The question of education and skills, Comrade Blade, that is here. All this is about the life and the future. And the question of how we manage the transition is very important. From us, will not judge the Commission's achievement about the beautiful slogans, the credential of the commissioners, the numbers of meetings, and but it's about changing the status quo, that the growing of the economy and the creation of decent jobs and the improving the life of our people will be the yardsticks that we are going to judge this performance of this transition. It has been 19 years since the World Summit on Sustainable Development. It has been 19 years since we resolved the debates. And the issue I think that is facing us now is how do we move forward, and we move with the speed required, and we move together. So thank you very much. And we have learned, we have appreciated what we are hearing. And I think we are going to be watching this commission very, very closely to its achievement. We want to see companies committing, coming with time frame, coming with target, coming with resources that they need to be put in place in realizing the objective of the just transition. And we hope that companies, because government is really poor, they will be able to bring the resources required, and they use this transition as an opportunity moving forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson of the session.